Also, our heartfelt thanks to the panelists for making available their valuable time and sharing their views on the supply chain intelligence and integrated business planning. Listening to such strategic thoughts and the experience sharing is invaluable to the audience as it helps to refine their approach in the future planning. I'm sure that going forward, we will have many more such opportunities to work together in the different supply chain initiatives of the COE. The pre-COVID-19 era saw organizations focusing on globalizing their supply chain to optimize the cost. However, the COVID-19 pandemic uncovered the weaknesses of the supply chains. While many organizations have been able to provide immediate solutions, the fundamental assessment of the strategy is required with the presumption that COVID-19 may not be the rare one of the disruptive event, and we could see other events of geopolitical, environmental, and technological nature, among others. A customer-centric, resilient supply chain strategy leveraging the digital-first approach is expected to be the key to unlock the value. It is high time that we draw the attention to the significance of building a buoyant and sustainable supply chain, one ready for the future. Keeping this in mind, let us move towards our next session, which is a roundtable on resilient and sustainable supply chain. We are glad to have with us today Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, Executive Vice President at Diageo India, Mr. Nitin Gupta, Vice President at Olam Agro India, Mr. Gauri Shankar Paramasivam, Head of Startup Accelerator, Maersk, Mr. Anil Srivastava, Director Planning and Logistic Business Unit, AB InBev, Mr. Nand Kumar Kulkarni, Integrated Supply Chain Director, Mondelez International, and Ms. Sakshi Rao, Head of AI Innovation Hub, R2 Data Lab, Rolls-Royce. And for moderating this session, we have Mr. Vraj Gokhale, who is the Partner India Lighthouse at KPMG. Over to you, Mr. Vraj.
Thank you very much. And welcome to all the participants. Thank you so much to the NASSCOM COE for having us here to have this interesting session. Truly stoked to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I was just listening in on the conversation earlier, and some really inspirational stuff being spoken about, everything that actually goes into building a supply chain and making it more resilient. But I have this phrase that I use nowadays. It's geography is history. When it comes to geography, nothing better than to talk about supply chains. And I believe over the last year and a half, the sheer amount of disruption that we've seen in supply chains, be it the way you do business, be it the way you price your products, the way you deliver your products. I heard a gentleman earlier say that master data management is so important because your physical channels went down by half, but your online channels went up by 3 to 4x. So all of these challenges have been happening on the ground. But what does it really mean to be resilient as far as the supply chain is concerned? What does it really mean to have a sustainable supply chain? And it's objective to ask, are you a resilient supply chain? Are you doing this or that? But every company is different. Every supply chain is different. And every company's environment is changing today at a very rapid pace. So what we would like to do in today's session with all the good folks who joined us for this session, is try to demystify what it means to be a truly resilient and sustainable supply chain. So with that, I'm going to start my first question. And this is interesting. So I was reading a report where, a lot of beverages in the US that were being sold out of stores, 6-packs, 8-packs, etc. They started selling trifold online. And that happened in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. And there were some companies who were trying to figure out how do we exactly, stay relevant to a customer, because this was called Deer Tech, I think, in the US. And also it was seen for other products, which was not maybe in the alcobev space, but it was seen for everybody, right? Now, everybody's questioning, why should I go to a store to buy anything when I can get the same experience online? So my first question, and this is where Sridhar, if you're there,
yeah.
If I can see you, yeah. So hi Sridhar, how are you doing? Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, fine, good, thanks.
So this is the same question I'm going to ask all of you guys, but to some of you, this may be more relevant. So starting with you, have you thought of, or what do you think about having a direct to customer model in the context of your business?
I think it just dates back just before the pandemic. The preparation is like we talk about, we spoken at length about omni-channel presence. I think that's the vision that we have set in. I think that has really helped us to fight over the pandemic and prepared us and propelled us to make sure that we serve the requirements. The only when we talked about omni-channel, we have defined the channel in 4 different segments, which were pertinent at the time of defining the strategy in 2019. We really disregarded the impact of the explosion that is going to happen due to this pandemic, right? So we defined more in terms of getting very, very close and changing our approach from a forecast-based servicing model to a demand-driven servicing model. And we said omnipresent and omni availability across the channels. So when we went in that strategy, we defined the overall service model. This pandemic, we had to course correct because the roadside store is the winner, and the modern trade crashing down tremendously. And the initial period of the time, even the e-retail had a multiple challenges relating to their logistics partners going down and all that. So one of that propelled us to completely course correct and put certain controls in terms of servicing it to the local store, which is below 2 kilometers. If you all know that's the shoppers, the advice was to purchase within 2 kilometers. So that's the strategy we started with. And as soon as the supply chains are started to understand this pandemic, we also dynamically changed our models to get into e-retail. So we went in with 3-1-Q model. That is about, we got into something called a 3-1-Q model. We looked at the last 3 weeks, the sales pattern, looking at every week in isolation, because there is no demand, predictability model that is existing at that point of time for e-retail. So we developed a very quick responsive mechanism. That's what Q stands for. So how do you all look at? So can I look at a standard model of servicing through the nearby distributor, or should I doing it through a nearby store? So we went with 3-1-Q model, and what we have clearly called out is, and we had a 190% growth rate in the first few weeks, went very, very close to about 400% as we move forward. I think like any other industry that has experienced. So one quick corrections of 3-1-Q model, understanding that model and putting the demand sensing. Actually, we said demand sensing and demand driven supply chain helps to cater the demand from a forecast based. That really helped us to deliver the demand, Mr. Raj.
Thank you so much for that very articulate answer, Sridhar. It seems like you guys were pretty well prepared, if I must say so. Pre-pandemic, that was something that I drew from this more than anything else. And demand sensing, there's a lot of demand sensing going around, but I like the way you said 3-1-Q, look at every week in isolation, because that's the whole point of demand sensing, right? Have a shorter period, shorter burst, but more data, more insight that goes beyond your obvious demand forecast.
Yeah, and that drives the huddle meetings, that drives everything, the way the supply chain models, that drives the revenue maximization, that drives everything else. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Sridhar. Sure. Moving on, I'm going to invite Rajshri, and I'm going to ask her to answer the same question. You're in a different world. You're in the world of Rolls-Royce. And that has multiple implications, but you have so many different businesses, right? So I'm just trying to understand how the whole direct-to-customer model would work for you all.
Okay, I'm not going to be talking Rolls-Royce specific. So also just to clarify, sometimes people might not know. So we are into the aviation business.
Oh,
so
yes.
Not
my apologies. Yeah.
Because that's the first confusion everybody gets. But coming back, see, especially during the pandemic, if you have noticed, the airline industry was the biggest hit. Now, of course, that brings to the reality as to, oh my God, now this whole supply chain, what's happening? you not prepared. Nobody expected. So nobody knew what to expect or what not to. And that's when we were all caught off guard, and the challenge was posed to us. So how do we then look at this whole model, right? Today, everybody's operating in a different world. So one way I would say, at least even in within the same industry in different companies, the one model they went to restructure or rethink was, how do we get access to the entire chain of supply chain. So that was not happening. You know what? Everybody has been telling we need to fix this problem, we need to fix this problem, but that problem has never been fixed. And you say, okay, emerging technologies, we're going to adapt this, we're going to bring the technology plus the business problem, we'll co-innovate, co-create. If you look at the last 2 years, since I moved to India back from Singapore in 2019. So prior to that, 10 years in Singapore, and everybody started off with this whole idea about, okay, we are doing smart nation, smart cities. The thing about IoT came up, then came up blockchain, then came up AI. But I didn't see the consistency with any technology which addressed any of these burning issues. Even today, even after the disruption with pandemic, we are trying to come up with a short-term solutions. We are still not adapting or coming up with a long-term solution. And today, that is a big problem I see. And I would say everybody's done like a patch, okay, my tire is punctured, I'm just going to do a patch up service at this point in time.
Yeah, it's like, this has happened to a lot of companies, right? Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get to that at some point in time. And one of the things we've seen is, apart from the whole digital acceleration bit, the general business transformation bit as well, going down to the brass tacks, has suddenly become so important, right? So I would completely concur with you. Thank you so much for that, Rajshri. Wonderful. And I'll make sure I remember the aeronautics piece you told me before.
I do have to emphasize, otherwise, people default think we are the car manufacturing organization.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. Same question. I'm going to move on to Sanjeev. In your world, how do you see this?
Well, Raj, when I look at my industry, this is the Elco web industry. Yeah, this has a different kind of turbulence when the COVID happened last year. We have got two route to markets predominantly. One is called off-trade, and another is called on-trade. So on-trade was completely disrupted because all the hotels and bars, industries were closed. And what happened, the whole demand kind of shifted to the off-trade. So retailers had more demand to really fulfill from the customers coming into the shops. So demand shifted from on-trade to off-trade. And then we also observed another kind of demand volatility. People moved from smaller packs to the bigger packs. Because people wanted to sit at home and don't go to the market every day or every week. We want to buy bigger packs. And suddenly we realized our demand for bigger packs is going to manifold within a week's time. And we have never planned for that, we will sell so much of bigger packs. So we have to really kind of sense this quickly and manage our, what we call it in our industry, we are famous for disruptions, unlike all other industries. In our industry, we get disrupted not because of market or the competition. That, of course, happens. But government also disrupts us many a time. The policy changes, an election happens, a dry day comes. So, entire thing goes for a spin. So generally, we all use a lot of, I call it scenario planning and disruption planning. So while COVID happened last year, we already had tools in our business which are kind of geared up to prepare for a situation where either a demand gets disrupted or a supply gets disrupted. What do we do? So we have I would say, a tool which is not really automated right now. We want to automate that. How do we do disruption and scenario planning if a particular situation happens either on demand side or supply side? Yeah. So I think that helped us quite a lot to really overcome this sudden changes in demand and the sudden changes in channel demand from off-trade to on-trade. So that was one side of disruption, I would say. On the other side, supply side also got disrupted big time because people were quite uncertain, not really happy to come to the factory or the operations. How do you make them feel confident? Yeah. So what we used to think about earlier, digitization. So digitization was happening earlier also. It did not begin to happen last year when the COVID happened. We are, thinking of, a digital access control in a factory. Yeah. But what happened after this COVID happened, the whole thing got accelerated big time. Today, we have got paperless or touchless access control in a factory. You enter one of our factories, there is a QR code on the factory gate. You scan the QR code, you check in on your mobile phone and access the factory. So I would say that technology also kind of got accelerated in last COVID or last 18 months time. We also looked at a lot of things inside a factory because where operations are manual, we require a lot many people, there are a lot many touch points. How do you automate them? So we have observed in last 12 months of in this industry the kind of automation which is picking up now. Now we've got cobots, being installed in our factories nowadays. Yeah, which is completely transformed the way we used to do end-of-line packaging. So I would say that sort of things were happening before, but what COVID has done, this pandemic has done, is accelerated the entire transformation of the technology piece in our operations, both on the supply side as well as demand side.
Thank you so much for that, Sanjeev. That was very insightful. Same question, but kind of to your competitor. Go ahead, Akhil.
Thanks, Raj, and thanks, co-panelists. This is an interesting discussion. Looking at various viewpoints, I personally feel it's fundamentally important for any consumer-centric company, which most of us represent here, to be where the customer goes, right? As Sanjeev was saying, most of the customers, I'm sitting right now in Bangalore, almost a lonely city. I never saw traffic being so low during the pandemic side because everyone eventually reverse migrated to their hometowns. That is a fundamental principle and philosophy where I believe it's about a principle number 6, which we call in a company called we go where the customer is because that's where the growth is. So the direct to consumer strategy really needs to be adaptable. And that's where we have worked on, obviously taking a lead from what Sanjeev said, various scenario plannings, breweries, government mandates, labeling, barcoding, blah, blah, blah. That obviously is one, but the biggest thing is to reach consumer and help them get the instant gratification satiated, which means the share of throat. If I am thirsty today, and this is one of the biggest selling drink here, I would like to go to my customer when it's cold beverage and get the share of throat. And that's where we should work across with the D2C. And one of the strategy which we eventually figured out is, to Sanjeev's point, our industry is fraught with a lot of regulatory hurdles. And that could be a challenge, that could be an opportunity to think out of the box. And in this case, the out of the box thinking is maybe we only go to 70,000 POCs as we call in our network of working, but there's a 2.2 million POCs which is open, which is a non-regulated system. So why not look at NABs, which is non-alcoholic beer. Such examples are like 0.0, and that's where we were now able to be on Indigo Airline for that matter. We are now being able to reach modern trade. We are now able to reach to the remote customers in some parts of India, which otherwise was not feasible earlier because of the limitation of distribution system. And that's what I would say, because that's where you count the resilience of anyone in terms of a consumer-centric company to reach directly to consumer, which also means you need to remodel your entire business model and maybe your product portfolio and look at inculcating and getting to the customer share of throat in my case, because we are liquid, so I'm saying share of throat, but in other case, it's market share likewise. So that's what I would say. COVID helped us think a lot in rejigging our business model.
I love that phrase, share of throat. Can I borrow that?
And the 0.0 is on me, don't worry, anytime.
Absolutely.
There is another version of that share of throat called liquid on lips, LOL.
Okay, guys, we of course, but thank you for that, Sanjeev. It's a good platform, I reckon. So my next question is going to be more around, so, some of that was spoken in as part of the earlier question. Of course, there was a lot of disruption of production per se, production lines, rapid ramp ups, rapid ramp downs, no visibility sometimes in terms of, where your FG inventory is, your work in process inventory, your raw materials, etc. A lot of these things actually happened, right? But amidst this disruption, how did you actually go about this, right, as a company? And this is a question I want to first pose to Nitin. So Nitin, if you could, chime in here, please.
Sure. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, co-panelists, and thank you so much, NASSCOM COE, for setting up this session. So Vraj, before moving on to this topic, I would just like to give a brief background that why exactly today this resilient and sustainable supply chain is gaining more relevance. And it is even more relevant for the agri sector where we are operating today. And we can clearly see that agri sector was the only silver lining during pandemic. So, I mean, just a background that the whole world population would be reaching close to 10 billion by 2050. And India's population would be close to 2 billion by that time. So if India has to feed that kind of population in 2050, so the productivity has to be improved, the production has to be doubled. But unfortunately, the land resources are finite. So the only way is to improve productivity. And what is happening today is that in the pursuit of improving productivity, the way agriculture has been done, it is impacting negatively to the environment. Right, so that's where we are seeing that the global warming is happening, the climate change is happening, and we can clearly see the impact of it, that the weather conditions are extreme today. So some part of the world is seeing the drought, whereas at the same time, some part of the world are experiencing floods. So we definitely need to reimagine what culture is done today. And that's where this resilient and sustainable supply chain solutions are gaining more importance. And on top of it, especially the millennial generation, so they are becoming more and more conscious in terms of their eating habits, especially after pandemic. We all have clearly seen that, my colleagues from FMCG industry can vouch for that, the customer is becoming more cautious in terms of their eating habits. And so they are more and more focusing on the safety food and hygienic part of it. And what's happening is that when we are stepping out and trying to feed those customers, so they want a sustainable supply chain solution for that. And what is sustainable supply chain solution? Which can give you end-to-end traceability and transparency in the whole supply chain. And I think that's where digitalization plays a very key important role in the today's world. And when we talk to the customer, so the only way to create that kind of stickiness with the customer is to have an end-to-end presence in the value chain and create that kind of stickiness with the customer by having presence right from upstream to midstream to downstream, which is farming, the processing, and connecting directly with the customer. So that is the only way out by which we can give that kind of visibility to the customer. Otherwise, the companies like us are no more going to flourish. In fact, they are going to perish over a period of time. So the only way to survive and sustain in this kind of a volatile environment, and the way things are changing, especially after this post-pandemic, is to create and develop a sustainable supply chain solution. And we, as Olam, we are a company having presence in 75 countries today, and we are across 44 agri commodities. You talk about any item which is used in the kitchen today, so we are into that. And across those commodities globally, we are trying to ensure that we are building a complete sustainable supply chain solution, so that we can give that kind of traceability to the end consumer, which is giving a positive impact in terms of the society, in terms of environment, and definitely the net positive impact on the economy as well. So but my take on that is this. So we are very clear that customer centricity is going to be the focus, and how to create that customer stickiness is by having this kind of a sustainable supply chain solution.
Thank you so much for that. That is very insightful, Nitin. Thank you so much. This is a much larger issue that you've brought our attention to. So thank you for that. I would like to ask the same question to Nand Kumar, and I want to see what his perspective on this is. Nand Kumar?
I think great question. Maybe a perspective from what I can say, FMCG, for fast-moving consumer goods industry point of view. And I will divide my response into two parts, how we approach short-term and then long-term. Now, short-term, we all know that short-term was all about crisis management. You are into COVID, so how you can really handle concerns around safety, security, how you create a war room kind of a situation where you get all the stakeholders and try and bring multiple elements together, which will help you to tide over the crisis. And during this time also, like, supply chain gets tested like never before, because although India is and disruptions are not new, but the kind of disruption which has happened with this COVID means the scale and duration is very unique, and that's where it has created the challenges probably those were invisible in the past across the value chain, not just supply chain, but if we see the challenges across the organization. And hence it was important to create a scenario planning at a different level, move from a static planning to a dynamic planning, adapt the technologies which can make a difference as you walk the tightrope, and also prepare simultaneously for a long term. Means understand the consumer behaviors, understand the channel shifts, understand the long-term technology impact, and embed them into the overall, say, supply chain strategy for a future. So this is how we approached it, that don't lose the focus on the immediate needs, but at the same time, don't get overwhelmed by only immediate needs, create a seeds for the future and bring a very balanced approach. And there are quite a few success stories, the way we handle the overall pandemic in a different way, the way we have scaled up overall supply chain performance, the way we have reached to the consumers, the way we drove innovations in the midst of pandemic. And that really is helping us to move forward towards our long-term ambition. That crisis is only helping us to accelerate that and not the other way around. So that's how we try to have a very balanced approach during this pandemic.
Thank you so much for that, Nandakumar. I'm going to move on to a different sort of a question. I mean, I would have loved to ask this question to each and every one of you all, but I think I think a lot of that was captured already over the last two responses. But what I want to move on to is something that's very close to my heart, maybe, and to others as well, potentially here. But how do you see? So the question is basically, there's so many exponential technologies out there right now that are shaping the way we actually do business more than anything else. Be it blockchain, be it IIoT, be it machine learning, be it artificial intelligence, right? All of these are playing a major role in making the supply chain more resilient, right? So, and they're also driving a few new things like, demand sensing, which we already heard before about from Sridhar, right? And we also heard a lot about it from Sanjeev. But my question to you here is very specific in terms of what are those 2 or 3 trends that you're looking at? And what are those 1 or 2 things that you are doing inside your organization to enable that? And I would like to ask Gauri Shankar this question first.
Hey, thanks, Raj. Interesting that you brought this question to me. Maersk is an organization which is catering to all the gentlemen who just spoke. So we have FMCG, we have Agri, we have Alcobevs. They're all our customers. So we are adapted to deliver the best for them, right? So as a logistics player, the need for you to stay adept with all the technologies that are in the market right now is a lot more important in today's arena, right? And it's not that logistics companies started looking at it only after the pandemic. We've been looking at it for quite some time, but as many of them attributed to, it's accelerated quite a bit, or rather the applications have been a lot more relevant in today's scenario. Some of our ethnic methods have completely gone for a toss, right? So the methods that we use for forecasting our customers' demand and supply is completely gone for a toss. It's not going to be any more relevant. So the idea then started about working on data integration methods, right? So how do I stay connected completely with my customer and the supplier and the end customer, so that I'll know what exactly is happening in their end, even without them telling me. So that's how the technology play kind of started out. It's largely in the data integration piece. That's one large emerging trend. Another piece is that the trainability of forecasting models, right? So earlier we used to believe in statistics alone for forecasting. It is not the case anymore. Now what we do is a significant amount of data modeling in order to understand how the progress would be for every supply chain changes. And it cannot be just set in stone. So all of these models that we are building, and it, to an extent that we can't even procure some of these from the market. So we are forced to build technologies in-house. So Maersk is investing heavily on building its own technology, and we also started looking at the startup landscape more extensively, right? So where I could really reap instant results from emerging tech companies or people who are working on new tech. So that's the directions that we took. So we started building our own tech a lot, and we started looking at the startup landscape. A lot of work that we do today around forecasting and modeling is completely in-house, and that allows us to intentionally maneuver our operations as and when the customer shifts their demands. This cases where there is significant
Is it just me or
No, I think
We can hear you, Raj.
Gauri's in.
okay,
Gauri got stuck.
maybe Gauri got stuck. So while he's coming back, why don't okay, he's come back, I think. Gauri, are you back? Okay, so maybe
Are
we
you able to
can-
hear me now, Raj?
Yeah, now you're good, Gauri. Yeah.
Okay. There was a drop in the network, I believe. So I was just trying to say that in order to manage the operations also, there was a lot of need for technology that we had to bring into play. And it also required a lot of shift in our ground operations because earlier our network was largely focused on ocean business. But in the last 3 years, and especially when there is a lot of approach towards D2C business models, the need for ground operations to be muscled up is much more heavier. So there's a lot of intermodal operations that we've beefed up, and this also talks about end-to-end traceability of every single commodity that moves through logistics partners. So these are some major emerging trends around traceability, forecasting capabilities, and around modeling our focus targets also. So these are some trends that I could call out, Raj.
No, the reason I also asked you this question was because you're the startup accelerator guy, and also because a lot of the folks over here in this room will depend on you. So I just wanted to get a sense from you, right, directly. So a view from the other side. But thank you so much for that, Gauri. I'm going to ask the same question now to Sanjeev. Sanjeev, what are your thoughts on this?
Braj, I think Gauri has given a good segue. I would say if I look at the emerging technologies called AI or machine learning or blockchain, they're big buzzwords nowadays. What our company and our approach has been to this whole piece is that what is the problem we want to solve for our business? Yeah, what is it we want to do for our supply chain? Yeah, so we came across a situation where we don't have a good track and trace system in place. And we have a lot of kind of challenges in that area to do it manually. So we have now gone into a blockchain technology solution for track and trace. Yeah. Then now having got some success in that area, we are now saying that very often we run into this whole our entire supply chain from supplier to the planners, to factories, to the logistics folks together, so that we can everybody work in the same seamless way to deliver the same customer order, rather than there are 4 or 5 truths in the supply chain or 4 or 5 interfaces working in their own directions. So I think we are exploring right now how do we extend the same concept of track and trace or the blockchain technology to solve our interface issues within the supply chain, which will help us to deliver what we call it best in class. Having tasted some success in this segment. Another, I would say, area is in the factory or manufacturing. A lot of work happens in the manufacturing in terms of finding out what's wrong in our lines, why our efficiencies are low, why our wastages are high, etc., etc. So if we can use our technology, which is machine learning based, and which we have figured out from the industry 4.0 fog, that this could be solved through a machine learning technology, where we can create solutions for multiple issues in the multiple lines together. And a lot of algorithms can be developed to help our operators to solve the problem on a real-time basis. So I would say that is the second piece we're working at with some of our startup companies to really explore what they can do for us to solve these problems. And third, I would say there are very specific problems. For us, to give you an example, to check a product or a bottle of our product, we say carry out 35 parameter checks. If a person is check it takes hell of a amount of time to check one bottle for 35 parameters. So we have gone to a startup company now to really develop a kind of solution for us, which is a vision camera based AI-enabled solution to help us to do it in 5 seconds time. So what our approach right now is in our company that rather than looking for technology, look for what problem we want to solve for in our supply chain and for the business. So that's how we are approaching this whole technology piece in our business.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for that response. I'm going to give the same question now to Rajshri. Rajshri, if you could.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you, Raj. That's a very interesting question, and we've been working on rethinking what technology applies to what. And I will just begin with blockchain, because this has been in the last 2 years, we've been thinking and we've been studying and researching as well how blockchain can be a good use into this, trying to track into where is your supply chain at what time. And this, because of the technology that it brings in, like some of those benefits that it has as a blockchain, the concept itself. So after actually evaluating, we just began to do certain POCs, but I haven't seen a big, people coming forward in adapting it. Now that is again, it gets stuck at a POC stage itself. And with high, regulatory compliance, data security, everything that comes into account, people are not stepping up to say, okay, we need to, implement whatever the regulatory requirements are, whatever the compliance that's required to be put in place. Because if you don't adapt certain things and you don't, put that first step forward to try, how does the change happen if you don't adapt? We are still stuck at a regulatory compliance, data security, and privacy. Now that's not going to help, or enable any one of us from the industry to use this emerging technologies that is available for problem solving. And either it's going to be at a POC stage, or it's always going to be at a prototypes, and we keep talking and talking and we're not solving anything. That's a number one point. And today, if you look at even addressing some of the challenges itself, one key issue that I always keep talking, because I was also leading the partnerships and innovations, trying to identify some of the deep tech startups. We worked together back in IBM, since Gauri was talking about Maersk. In fact, IBM, when they were big time into the Hyperledger, the blockchain thing, they did a complete POC with Maersk in trying to do this whole tracking from the source. They did a multiple projects. IBM did invest quite a bit in that. But beyond that POC and a prototype, I haven't seen real implementation happening. Now that's where it's stuck from a technology perspective. And the second thing today, if you ask me the latest trend, there's something which is called an internet of behavior. And this is very recent. Now, as we speak, okay, I'm speaking, my computer is actually listening to me, okay? And it's going to now, the moment I finish this session, it's going to give me all the things that I've spoke. It's already listening. So like you said, demand sensing. Now the behavior is what it's tracking. So what is the things that I'm talking about? What are the things I can use? So this is already embedded, like companies like today, Google, their DeepMind technology, or Facebook, they have come up with some of the advanced technologies which is already implemented. That's why we call it internet of behavior. And that's a big, big thing that's coming up as we evolve in the future. But today, technology can only enable as long as the organizations also use that and try to come and implement it. Otherwise, we are not going to go anywhere, because I'm giving you the ground realities. We're still stuck in POC's prototype stage.
Fair enough. Thank you. So POC purgatory is, what a lot of, is what happens a lot. But of course, lovely insights. I've got two phrases today now that I can use. You just gave me the second one. So
which is?
So with that, I'm going to go back to the person from whom I got the first phrase. Akhil, if you could stand in on this one.
Oh, this is fantastic. I was just reflecting my past. I spent quite some hard-earned money to go to Stanford, learn about all these technologies, right? Look at from who is who. My professor was Professor Hao Lee, who originated the concept called bullwhip effect, right? Which is, for everyone others on the speaker and the listening panel, is about demand distortion. I regret why I spent so much of money, because 2 years later, I'm literally figuring out this demand distortion every day in our industry for everyone who is doing a pipeline-based business, for that matter, right? A product-based, physical product. That brings me to the next point. Well, yes, there are disruptions. They have opened up a lot of fractures in our business models, in our way of working. And in fact, I'm really happy for 17 people whom I count on the screen, and several more who would have joined together. Choosing supply chain as a profession has been the best cause, which I would say. It was not by chance, it was by choice. I started in sales, moved into supply chain, very happy to do that, because going forward and coming and drawing my lead from ITC, we used to call it as FAV, freshness, available, visible, right? There's only so much we have done in the last 2 years for visibility. Tell me how many people have visited malls, but everyone has ordered from various omni channels or ways like those. So it's all about the freshness and the availability, and that's where the tech innovations have to work. This is where supply chain leaders like us will start making supply chain as a business fundamental chain that's no more a cost center. It's a business competitive advantage. And why I am so very vehemently talking about this is in the last 2 years, my precedent has been more banking on supply chain rather than banking on sales, right? How much will you save was the question, then how much can you sell more for last 2 years, right? That clearly told that cost, capacity, delivery and capability are great factors to be combined together. Yes, obviously, supply chain, procurement, all backend is always considered to be a cost thing. And I believe Nitin from all I see would be the one person who will say commodity cost for that matter. The moment it increases, there's a lot of slump, right? But capability building emerges out to be one of the biggest levers during COVID. Those who were able to service the consumer and customers are the winners. Their models have evolved. There were clear line of fractures across our business models, mostly emanating from the supply chain, right? So drawing a leaf from what Rajshri said beautifully, there are several technologies which we can embark on. The journey could be going as high as blockchain to as low as moving from an Excel sheet, which most of us still operate as the learning technology. They can be SAP and everything. Eventually, everything comes to calculator and Excel sheets still today, right? So I believe there is step-gate process, one being a IoT of future, and that's where 30, 40 billion devices which will get deployed, as Rajshri just said, they are listening to me at various platforms. That would be the starting point before we go to the ultimate phase, which is about building high-tech like blockchains, ML, and AI. Because still, AI is all about looking at, this is a cat versus a mouse. That doesn't solve real business problem today. It can solve in 2030, maybe earlier, but that's about it. So I would circle this back into one very single statement. And Raj, if you like collecting those, collect this one for sure, right? 60-30-10 rule is what I believe will enable supply chains of future. 60% is all about us. The people who would love to be in supply chain would really think this is not a function which is, not so glorified like a marketing, but definitely earns the moolah for the business and builds fundamental structural changes. That's about people. So 60% is change management in people. 30% is processes, which Rajshri just said. If the processes are bottlenecked, doesn't move. It's beyond POC, doesn't move on, right? And then 10% is on their tools, which enable the people and processes to enable things do faster and quicker. So 60-30-10 is where I rest my case on this. I believe the first thing starts with us here on this platform. And let's refine the processes, then comes the tools and gradation of them.
Sure. Thank you for that, Akhil. That was a wonderful answer. Professor Howley, Dr. Calvin Lee, I still remember, I think I had written a paper once based on the bullwhip effect and, its applicability from a
we
cloud.
Should chat more. I have a couple on blockchains as well. So let's exchange notes.
So, let's exchange notes. But with that, Sridhar, your perspective on this, because I want to capture that quickly, and then I want to move on to sustainability, which is something that I really want to talk about here. So please go ahead, Sridhar.
I think thanks to the fellow panelists, they clearly voiced out what we call it as is the fit to purpose automation. I think the various companies are giving various terminologies, what is relevant. I really like the quote given by my fellow panelists on FAV, freshness, availability, and the value. Okay, I think the value part of it. I think that is exactly we have been our approach has been. When we look at the segmentation, we looked at the pyramid of affordability. Okay, what is the value that the average consumer is looking at today? It is one, there is a disruption in the whole supply chain, and second is there is a disruption in the economies for the consumers. It's not that all the consumers are going to sustain their economy. So when we marry both the problems together is where we thought would be the success of a sustainable organization lies at. So hence we looked at what fits to the purpose of the company. So we looked at fit to purpose automation. We looked at demand sensing, as a biggest opportunity. And second is, while the demand sensing and serving the demand, we also looked at value maximization for each of my consumers. So what's the perceived value of my consumer from the products and services that I am offering to? So that's a two purposes that we have put, and then we divided the whole of our segmentation of the products and services into three different models. One is the bottom of the pyramid, middle of the pyramid, and top of the pyramid. And for three of these demands, we have approached in a different way by using TOC principles, the theory of constraints, and using the theory of constraints, using the demand sensing, and like I said, 3-1-Q model, where we are we are looking at the demand sensing as a critical enabler for rest of the operations to happen. And value maximization travels all the way back to my farmer. It doesn't end only with the consumer or at what Nitin spoke about, the commodity pricing. So we travel the value maximization to our both upward and those downward directions of supply chain, going back to the farmer, making them understand what is the value maximization. How do you understand what is a simple thing like what is the impact of environment moisture on your yield of the crop that you get, and how do you maximize that, and how do you use your technologies to help you to maximize the yield, and how can I help you to build a cold storage unit, what's the right time to cut the crop. So we looked at every single leg. I think that is what is meeting the purpose of the maximization of our inputs and creating a huge surplus to the sustainable ecological balance. I think that is where we have used our technologies into, and that is what we call it as a fit to purpose technologies that we have deployed, largely based on the TOC principles, largely based on the heuristics that are available with various platforms. So we are and we have used SAP as a big enabler at both downstream and upstreams. We embrace a little bit of AI at few of the areas, but not like we said, we choose the models what fits to our purpose rather than relying on a model that is already pre-existing. Again, it's a tailor-made for the organization. That's how been our approach, Raj. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Sridhar, for that. That was very articulate. Thank you for your insights. Now I'm going to talk about, how do you balance this whole thing between building a more resilient supply chain versus a sustainable supply chain? And when I'm talking about sustainable supply chain, I'm obviously talking about the environmental angle, the ESG angle over here, right? Because if you think about it, there's more to be done than ever before, and there's more to be saved than ever before. So how do you find that, how do you tread that path, and how do you balance those trade-offs, right? And between resilience and sustainability. And I would like Nitin here to chime in first. Nitin, if you could go, please.
Sure, Raj. So I'll start with where I stopped, Raj, last time. So see, the way this agriculture has been done in India and especially across the globe. See, on one side, we are clearly seeing that because of this global warming, the agriculture or the productivity has been negatively impacted. But on the other side, agriculture is a contributor to global warming. And I just would like to give all of you one very small but very pertinent example. So rice, the way rice is grown in India, so it's the paddy is grown under flooded conditions. So it's a completely anaerobic conditions. But when you apply chemical and fertilizers over there, it releases methane gas. And methane gas is the biggest contributor of global warming today. So 70% of man-made methane gas released is under agriculture only. So clearly there is a need to change the way we are doing agriculture today. And I think that's where it is becoming more and more pertinent to see that how we can develop a sustainable transparency and a traceable supply chain over there. And that can be done by adopting different kind of technology. So when we're talking about rice, so let's say discuss about rice only. See, there are technologies like alternate wet and drying method, where you are not supposed to flood the field across the season. So it's all about wetting the field first and then alternating with drying. So that's one mechanism. Drip irrigation is catching, it's picking up fast. wherein you are just supposed to apply water. Even at the plant level, you are not supposed to irrigate the field. Then the third is about the land laser leveling mechanism. So that's how you can adopt those technologies, and Olam has tried to do that in one or the other way. If I give one global example of cocoa, so the total world's cocoa production is roughly 4 million metric tons, and 70% of that gets produced in Ghana and IVC today. So in IVC, Olam is the one who is participating right from the farmers level, where at the point of origination, we are procuring cocoa, we are bringing it to the port, shipping it to UK or Singapore, where we have our own factories, and we are processing that into cocoa butter and powder, bringing it to India, and then selling it to companies like Mondelez. So in the whole process of bringing cocoa, finally the end product to India and selling it to the customers, so what kind of carbon footprints we are generating? So we are capturing those carbon footprints even today, and it's all through a digital mechanism. So Olam as a company has developed Olam Farmer Information System. So it's a digital tool wherein we are not only registering the farmers, but ensuring that the kind of activities done right pre-harvesting level or at the planting level to the post-harvesting, and including the whole supply chain part of it, finally to the end of the consumer. So that whole leg is captured in that digital tool. So that at the end of the day, we are able to give that value proposition to our customers. See, this is what we are doing, and this is how we are trying to ensure and keeping the environmental friendly. So for example, today, we are ensuring that through digital tool that no child labor is used. We are ensuring that if we are damaging the environment over there, we are doing the equal amount of tree plantation or forestation over there. And similarly, the communities which are associated with us, we are making sure that how to improve the livelihood of those communities who are residing in those areas. So that's how we are trying to develop a complete ecosystem, right, through this digital supply chain solution, so as to make this agriculture a sustainable one, not for the current requirement, but definitely for the generations to take advantage of these resources which are available in the nature.
Thank you so much, Nitin. Those are some amazing insights. The whole thing that you talked about as far as rice is concerned and the methane that it releases after it's treated. I mean, I thank you for that. That really helps. And all the other insights. This was very useful indeed. Thank you so much. Gauri Shankar, same question for you.
Maersk as an organization is pretty serious about this carbon neutral efforts, right? So, earlier when we made these promises about 2030, we will have our first carbon neutral vessel on float, and 2050 will be a zero carbon shipping company. It sounded like a flamboyant flaunting for the media's sake, but right now we've ordered 8 vessels which are run on alternate fuels, and also
Gauri, you there? I think maybe he's having a spot of trouble there. So while he's coming back to us, maybe I'll direct this question to Rajshri till he comes back. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Raj, I'm going to actually give you I'm the Global Director General for Sustainable Development Goals, and literally work with the regions. And this is one of my most passionate subjects. Okay. And I'm going to give a case study. We are talking about too many different things as to what we're doing, but there is a fundamental problem which we all don't know, and we are not even addressing this. So I'm going to take about the chips and the renewable energy. Now, I'm going to talking about the silicon chip. Now, we all know that today we live and breathe on the silicon chips because all our communication device, or you take even, the cars, one car, I recently was doing a research and I found that one car about say example, just a basic car like Maruti Ignis, has about 1,000 chips installed in it. Okay. I was literally aghast. And to me, this is a very burning subject, and it was disturbing. I'm like, oh my God, the consumption of silicon chips is so high. I never knew this when this happened. Now, one of the most dangerous thing right now is the illusion that the alternate energy like wind and solar are different from fossil fuels. Okay, I'll tell you why. Now, we have been told that the silicon chips is made out of sand. Okay, that is what we have been told. But the main ingredient that makes them work, whatever the solar, wind, everything, right? Everything is silicon itself. Now, silicon is not made of sand. the silicon, it's a raw material that has to be made from something. But what we have always told is, no, it is made of sand. Now, the main ingredient to make the silicon chips is called the high quality quartz. And this natural resource is available, the main ingredient to make the silicon chip is available in North Carolina. It's called the spruce pine and is regarded one of the most finest quality of quartz available. Now they mine this quartz. And the way this is manufactured is, you take a piece of coal, you take this piece of high quality quartz, and you burn at a 1800 degree temperatures high. And what happens when this whole thing burns is, you get the metal called silicon. And while you burn, the carbon dioxide evaporates, and what is left with you is the carbon. So where is carbon neutral? We are living and breathing carbon. So where is zero carbon footprint? I don't understand. So what is sustainable? Now, and if you say you want to use an alternative renewable energy, whether it is solar or wind, do you know how many chips is required to install in a windmill or power a solar? There's the research. So if you take an entire football ground and you're installing the solar panels, okay, the energy that you can power is maximum 8 houses. Now, in a country like, I'm just giving in the United States as an example, where half of the year you're going, it's literally cold. Now, where is sun? So how much of solar energy are you actually powering? And what are you destroying? You're destroying all the beautiful desert or those plants. You're destroying the environment. You're actually bringing in all those material, which is actually, again, creating more harm to us. And the next aspect is that, now, where is, if there is no sun, where this gets powered back into grid. So what is renewable energy at the end of the day, or where is sustainability? Now, this is the question I ask everybody, because if we all don't one of the panelists was talking about, and he was telling, if this is the people we are here who are into supply chain and who are talking about these challenges, and if we don't come forward to do something about it in whatever capacity possible, how are we going to ensure there is a sustainable, whatever you want to kill, whether it is raw materials, whatever that you're manufacturing, where is the element of sustainability is my question to all of you here. And today we don't have one phone, okay? We have number of phones. We have 2 phones, 3 phones. We have 2 computers, 3 computers. We have 3 cars, 4 cars. So what happens? What is the kind of future we're going to leave? And that also goes again with a similar thing about biomass energy. Now, again, I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to give in, because I've been doing this research, and this is the education I'm trying to tell people, how do you cut? You're actually living every single day and breathing carbon. So what are you talking about carbon net neutral? And also that's impacting the future generation. Kids use extensively these mobile phones. It's impacting them. The other aspect is about the biomass energy. Do you know how does the biomass energy, even the plant, what happens in that? So they cut the wet wood or green wood. It is cut into small bits. So they destroy literally like the whole forest. There is, I think, more than 1,000 plants that's been set up in the United States. And a lot of environmentalists are against this because people don't have an understanding about what happens in this kind of plant. And because it gets branded as renewable, they get the license to do this. Now they cut all these woods into small pieces, and that green wood or wet wood cannot burn without some kind of a fuel. So they make this the tire. They cut into small pieces. So they combine this so that it can fuel up. And what are you getting? Oh my God, there's so much of pollution. You're destroying the environment. And in the name of like biomass energy, they destroy a whole forest. You know how many years it takes for the forest renewable to come back?
I'm with you, Rajeshri. Thank you so much that was very insightful. Great perspective. Thank you so much. Obviously, this shows that, you know so much about this topic and you're so passionate about it. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, I had to cut you because we're kind of reaching the top of the hour, and I know Gauri started, but kind of something happened. So Gauri, if you can take a minute, close on what you were talking about, and then we can, just summarize and close the session, please.
Definitely. Sorry for that. My technology is not supportive today. But three elements that we looked at in terms of having a sustainable value chain as a logistics integrator. One is decarbonizing logistics, right? How we do things. Can we fix the machinery that we use? Can we stop, polluting in as many ways as possible? Second is, building a sustainable end-to-end offering, right? As many of you rightly pointed out, it is not an independent responsibility, right? So it has to work from the customer point of view as well. People like Olam, people like H&M. There's a lot of these good customers who join hands with us in terms of having a green logistics or a sustainable logistics model, which incurs a definite amount of additional cost as well. And they are okay to incur that as long as they don't impact the environment. And the last one is about having responsible business practices, right? What do we do to ensure that it percolates down to every bit of the organization? As a company, between 2008 to now, in the last 12 years, we've sliced our carbon footprint by 46%. And we plan to cut it down at least annually by 2.5%. So which means by 2030, with baseline as 2008, we would have cut down by 60%. So that's where we are heading to. And in terms of building this responsible business practice, as I said, will obviously affect the end consumer as well, right? Because there is a 20% potential increase in shipping rate, which commonly gets attributed towards a carbon neutral shipping whenever it comes to the play, right? But if you cut it down to a smallest component, what a consumer would incur eventually, an $800 computer or a laptop, you would incur an additional 60 cents. That's how much a consumer would eventually burn as a additional burden in order to ensure that there is a sustainable environment. And there's a lot more examples. A pair of sneakers is about 0.6 cents. A banana is about just 0.1 cents. But it's just so much small value to be additionally incurred in order to ensure that we have a sustainable value chain in the logistics space. So that's just some additional points that I wanted to share, Raj, as long as the network works for me.
I think it's working fine for you. And I think paying a few cents to such a large value laptop, it's a no-brainer, right? To think about it. And the multiplicative effect of that, when you multiply that by thousands and millions of those, that's powerful. But at the same time, I don't want to say anything more because Rajshri will then pound me and say, no, I just told you about chips and you didn't get the point, But I've got to respect that, I think so. Thank you. I think we've come to the close of this session. Thank you all for being wonderful participants. I think we got some excellent insights. I hope the audience that's watching this and the NASSCOM COE also got what they wanted out of this. I think I'm a lot richer out of this conversation. I got some wonderful insights, and I think the audience would have too. With that, I would just like to say thank you for your passion and thank you for everything. And yeah, with that, let's close the session. Wonderful to have all of you on board, and will be great to stay in touch as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a nice time.
Thank you.
Thank you
all.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you all.
Likewise.
It was quite an enlightening session. Thank you all for the valuable insights and the thoughts. It was full of crucial takeaways, and we are sure that the audience would certainly appreciate the unique